Recording. Great. So thank you all for tuning in. Sorry that we're kind of back and forth with, we're in a travel season for us. We were in Vietnam, Cambodia, and then last week in Morocco, and next week we have to be in the States. So bear with us. I'll try to keep you posted. And when we will come back, actually, according to plan, only right the day after Purim or after Shushan Purim. But I'll give everybody a heads up so you're on top of our schedule. So sorry for all the disruptions. We're going to have a very fascinating topic and discussion today about Yitro, centered around Yitro. First, I want to say that we dedicate this year to the well-being and recovery of all those who were caught in the earthquake, which hit Turkey and Syria and actually killed a number of, or some people within the Jewish community in Turkey. So at some point, I told our hosts that we're going to try to have a share, which actually I'm giving on Shabbat and Renana. Does God create earthquakes? There's a fascinating Gemara about earthquakes and God's position vis-a-vis earthquakes, but that's not our subject for today. Today, we're going to talk about the subject of the stunning skeleton in Moshe's closet. And it is indeed a wild ride. So bear with me as we try to lay the groundwork and explore this topic as we read this Shabbat, Parshat Yitro. Well, first of all, let's begin with a number of questions. Moshe meets Yitro, his father-in-law, to be, when he comes to Midian. He's escaping from Paro. After he kills the Egyptian, there's a price put on Moshe's head, and he runs away and he goes to Midian. He will be there for 60 years. He kills the Egyptian at age 20. He will return to lead the Jewish people out of Egypt at age 80. So he's there quite a long time. And the pasuk says, and this is our first question, Vayoel Moshe lashevet et ha'ish. This is back in Parshat Shemot, in the second parak, the 21st pasuk. And the translation of this strange word, Vayoel, not like the name Yoel, by the way, that Moshe, Art Scroll says, Moshe desired to dwell with the man. Rashi immediately picks up on the fact that, that it's an unusual word, especially with its meaning, and says perhaps that Moshe, that it comes from the word that means to take an oath. And Rashi says maybe it was the oath that it's hard even to understand this, that he was sworn that he would not leave without the permission of Yitro. Okay, but I think it's more complicated than that. What kind of oath did Moshe take with his father-in-law? We'll come back to that. Second question deals with the children. So Moshe marries Tzipporah, and he has two children. And the first is called Gershom, and we know the phrase that connects the name Gershom to Moshe's situation. Ger hayiti be'eretz nachriya, says Moshe. I was a stranger in a strange land, right? We've heard this expression used. It was the name of a famous book, Stranger in a Strange Land. And the implication, of course, is that Moshe is in Midian, and it's a strange land to him. But it goes deeper. There's more here than meets the eye. Maybe this isn't Moshe talking about himself when he names his first son Gershom. Obviously, you see the word Ger. It could even be read Gershom. He was a stranger there. Maybe this is perhaps more of a prophecy than it is indicating Moshe's present situation. Later on, we have, in this week's Parsha, we are repeating the names. It's a strange thing that we're not sure the age difference between Gershom and Moshe's second son, Eliezer, but the name of Eliezer only appears after Matan Torah. And clearly, that's a long period of time to separate the birth of these two boys. The pasuk says, and listen to the words, when we're talking about Yitro coming to meet Moshe after Kriyat Yamsuf, because Vayish Yitro, he hears that the sea has split. He heard about Amalek. You can see if you get the Parsha sheet, 3 different things he might have heard. But in any case, he brings Tzipora and he brings the 2 boys. They weren't with Moshe and the rest of the people when they traveled through the desert and the sea was split, etc. And the pasuk says, "Vayikach Yitro chotei Moshe Tzipora eshet Moshe achar shilucheha," after she had been sent away. A little bit of a pointed remark, because Moshe had said, "You stay back in Midian while we take care of business here in the desert." It only comes later. Ve'et shnei baneha, and they bring the 2 sons. Asher shem ha'achad Gershom. The name of the first is Gershom. Ki amar ger hayiti be'eretz nachri, as we said before, stranger in a strange land. V'shem ha'achad Eliezer, and the name of one is Eliezer. So it should have said Shem ha'echad Gershom, v'shem ha'sheni, or Shem ha'acher Eliezer, but he calls both of them echad, and then gives the meaning of the name, Ki Elohei avi be'ezri, v'yatzileni mecherev paro, that God was with me and God saved me from Paro's sword. So repeating the word echad seems very strange, and maybe the names would have made more sense if they were reversed, because Moshe really was saved from Paro's sword initially when he ran away from Egypt and Paro and the army chasing him before he came to Midian. And maybe he should have named his oldest son or his eldest son Eliezer, and maybe the second one, when he's escaped already and he's in Midian, Gershom. So the order of the names seems very strange, or maybe perhaps he should have switched these names. Then we have a very enigmatic story that took place back in the 4th parak, back in Shemot. We know the story, but just to repeat it, that they're traveling. Vayhi b'derech b'malon. Moshe and his sons and Tzipora they're traveling, and like good Jews, they stop in a hotel. And then Vayifkesheu Hashem vayivakesh hamito, and God encounters him and seeks to kill him. And then the story of Tzipora taking a stone, Vaytikach Tzipora tzor, and she performs the brit on one of those children. It doesn't say who. Vatichrotet orlat bena. And then, in a sense, she saves him from death. But it doesn't identify, it uses all pronouns. I mean, it says him. It doesn't say Moshe, Tzipora, Gershom, Eliezer. We're not 100% sure who the him is. Now, most commentators say this is a reference to the circumcision of the newborn Eliezer, which, of course, should have been done on the 8th day. Moshe knows that, right? Abraham instituted Brit on the 8th day a long time ago. And that's the popular conception, that this is talking about Eliezer. But others say it's not Eliezer, that it's Gershom who was not circumcised. Eliezer, born right after Matan Torah, was circumcised immediately, but Gershom was born years earlier, and he had not been circumcised yet. Why not? What's going on here? And who is the him in this very oblique and mysterious incident that took place on the way. Finally, before we try to answer these questions, why is it that we never hear anything more about Moshe's two sons? The children of our greatest hero in history seem to disappear down the black hole of history without a trace. So there is a lot of strange things happening in conjunction with Moshe and his family and his sons and Yitro. So I want to try to put the pieces of this puzzle together with a mind-blowing Gemara and Midrash. That's very, very hard to believe. If the Gemara would not have said it, then you can't make this up. So we're going to fast forward to a story that's told in Shoftim, the book of Judges, chapters 17 and 18. In a moment, we're going to share not yet, in a moment, we'll share the screen to show you something quite amazing. In this story that's told in Shoftim, someone named Michiyahu becomes the founder of an idolatrous cult. He had an idol and he built a temple for the purpose of people worshiping this idol. But he wasn't very charismatic. He needed somebody with leadership qualities, somebody who had a sense of spirituality and bearing to be the leader of this group, essentially to be the head of this cult. And after a long search, says the Tanakh, he meets someone named Yonatan, the son of Gershon, the son of Manasseh of the house of Levi. And Michiyahu offers this individual the job of being high priest of this new religion that he's creating. And this Yonatan agrees. But who was this person, this mysterious Yonatan, ben Gershon, ben Manasseh of the house of Levi? According to the Gemara in Baba Batra, there is this astounding statement that Manasseh is not really the name of this person's grandfather. It is a disguised form of none other than Moshe. Indeed, that Yonatan, the head of an idolatrous cult, is the grandson of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now let's do the sharing for a moment, if we can, of this section of the book of Shoftim. So if that's possible to do, okay. Now, can you expand that just a little bit, that picture? Can we go a little bit to the side? Okay, perfect. Now you'll take a look at this. You see on the third line, Yonatan ben Gershom ben Manasseh. Now, there's only two places I know of in the Torah where you have a floating letter. One place, and in both of them, it's a nun. We have it in the Torah when we talk about Vayhi bin Soah Haaron. You have these kind of floating nuns that surround that parsha. Look at the Manasseh with the nun floating in the air. So the Gemara says, do you know why it's written that way? And you can see the comment by Radak just below Lamed, Hanun Tuluya. And earlier we had said the reason for it was because it was to save embarrassment to Moshe, because the name should have been Yonatan ben Gershon ben Moshe. But because it's such of a busha that Moshe should have an idolatrous grandson, they disguised it by putting a nun in there. But since his name really wasn't Manasseh, although some people want to say by being head of a cult, he was as bad as the wicked king Manasseh. Nevertheless, that's not the name that belongs there. But to save Moshe embarrassment, they put in a nun, a superfluous letter in between the mem and the shin, so you wouldn't read it as it should be read, Moshe. It's quite a crazy thing. Thank you for sharing that. What happened? How did Moshe come to have a grandson who went so against everything he stood for to become an idolater and the head of an idolatrous cult? So there the Medrash explains what happened. That after Moshe was working as a shepherd for Yitro, he sought permission to marry Tzipporah. Yitro agreed, but he said, I'm making one condition. I am stipulating that the firstborn son that you and Tzipporah have will be dedicated to serve as a high priest in the Midianite religion. Because some say Yitro wanted to make sure he would have a successor, because that's what he was. And he said to Moshe, any other children you have, bring them up the way you want to. But the firstborn, no, I want him to be raised under my tutelage. And I will direct his upbringing. And Moshe agrees. He wants to marry Tzipporah. There's all kinds of reasons given why Moshe would agree to this crazy stipulation, this crazy Tanai. And one of the ideas is he calculated, well, listen, by the time this firstborn son gets old enough to go out on his own and to serve as a priest, Moshe figured I'll have converted Yitro and he'll be a true Jew and he'll no longer hold me to this condition that I agreed to. Moshe's promise haunts him for years. And according to this idea, that's why he named his firstborn son Gershon. I was a stranger in a strange land. Moshe perhaps meaning, I was not my own man. I couldn't make my own decisions. I was a guest. I took refuge in Yitro's house. He took me in, but I was a stranger. And I had to basically go with the flow and I had to survive. So I agreed to something that was very odious to me, says Moshe. But I figured in the end, it'll be okay. We'll all convert, they'll all convert to be true believers in one God, etc. And therefore, what happens in this story of Tzipporah, and that's why I question who is the him, that it could be that God, as it says, was looking to kill him. Maybe that was Moshe because he agreed to something like this. And one of his oldest son is going to go against this path of belief in one God. Some want to say maybe it was, he wanted to kill him, meaning Gershon, that he didn't want to have somebody around who was going to worship idols in the family of Moshe. That's why the him is not specified, because it could be either one of them. And this perhaps is why Gershom was not circumcised, because Yitro said, listen, in our culture, we don't circumcise. And he's under my tutelage. I'm not circumcising him. And therefore, perhaps Tzipporah steps in as another one of the brave women of Israel. And she says, enough is enough. I'm circumcising him. Moshe made a promise that, yes, Yitro, you'll be in charge of my first son. But Tzipporah says, I didn't make that promise. And so I'm going to step in and I'm going to actually give him the circumcision. Now, the truth is that Moshe's son eventually is spared, and that it's the grandson who continues perhaps on this path that Yitro had in mind, and he becomes the idolater. Gershom, no, but their son Yonatan, he is the one, as the story in Shoftim tells us, that he becomes the head of this cult. And so this is the oath that that we read about. Vayoel, he gave an oath, and he said to Yitro, yes, I make an oath that I won't tamper with you. I'll let you raise him, and we'll see what happens. And as often happens, it skips a generation. So Gershom, although we don't hear anything from him, but we don't hear that he necessarily turned to idols. It's the next generation, the son of Gershom, the grandson of Moshe, who goes astray and becomes the head of this idolatrous cult. So the pieces are falling into place to try to answer all of these questions about the strange use of the name Ger Hayiti Be'eretz Nachria, that in a sense, he had gone and become a kind of ger. We say ger in the positive sense of Yitro becoming a convert to Judaism, but the fear was that Gershom will go the other way and stop believing in one God, be a stranger, and adopt the cult of idolatry. Although it only goes on in the third generation with this Yonatan. What exactly is going on here as well? What's the thinking? Because we have a very high appraisal of Yitro. We named, he's one of only 6 people who have a parsha named for him. And, he's given very mechubad place that he teaches Moshe about judgeship, and Moshe listens to him, etc. But Yitro's philosophy was that I'm going to sample every religion. And I want, he's very spiritual. I want to find out what is the most fulfilling and the best way to get close to God. What pathway should I take? And he samples all these different religions. And then he comes to Judaism and he says, you know what? This is the best one that I found. So he decides, I'm going to be a Jew. The problem and the flaw in that philosophy that Yitro follows is that what happens if you find something better? Okay, now Judaism is great. I like it. I like the Knedlach. I like the, singing in the shul. I might even like the fasting several times a year. It's a nice, way to keep the weight off and have a nice diet. That's great. But what happens if you go to some ashram in India or who knows where, and you say, wow, this makes even more sense to me? That's the problem. We don't accept Judaism because it's currently the rage and the hot item. We accept it on the basis of faith. Na'aseh v'nishma. First I'll do it, then I'll learn about it. First you have a commitment, and then I'll find out just how amazing it is. I don't first find out how amazing it is, and then I decide to adopt it. And this is why I've always said that Yitro, although he is considered a ger tzedek, a righteous convert, he doesn't compare to Ruth, because you see the difference between them. That Ruth, she's not sampling other religions. She, Dafka, comes from a royal family, and she goes into a situation of poverty where things are essentially very unpleasant. And she says, nevertheless, I take it on fully. I don't have to be so impressed that I say, oh, this must be the best possible religion. And Ruth, therefore, sticks with it. And we see she appears throughout history. She becomes the ancestress of Moshiach and David HaMelech, whereas Yitro disappears from the pages of history. So this may be the source of Gershom's name, that he also tries other forms of spirituality, and maybe he views himself as a stranger, estranged from his father's beliefs, or maybe even in all these other religions, he feels like I'm a stranger, and he returns to the fold. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen to his son. And he has this DNA ability of leadership and charisma, but unfortunately, he doesn't use it as Moshe did. He uses it to lead this other cult and attract and lead astray other people to a foreign religion. And the story is stunning and it leaves us with a lot of food for thought. First of all, we ask the question, why did Moshe not succeed with his grandson? Okay, he gave this promise to Yitro, strange as it may be, because he felt compelled, he wanted Tzipporah, he was in a bad situation. So he agrees. And by the way, there are sources that castigate Moshe for this and say, why didn't you say no? How about the Jews in the Inquisition when they were told to convert or turn their children over for conversion, and they said no, but you, Moshe, you didn't say no? So interestingly enough, Moshe gets, from certain sources, the great Moshe, he gets a bit of critique for what he did. But beyond that, we can ask the question, why did Moshe fail in a sense? Because, if your grandchildren go that astray, in a sense, they've cut off the chain of transmission of Judaism, even if it's in a later generation. So there's a lot of answers given and a lot of food for thought. One idea is that maybe Moshe neglected his family out of over devotion to his cause. And there's a lot of, unfortunately, truth to this. People, and it's certainly true sometimes of rabbis, they're so dedicated to the well-being of their congregation and their congregants that they forget about their own children. The famous statement that the shoemaker has no shoes, or the child of the shoemaker has no shoes, that he was neglectful. And maybe that's why Moshe's brother and sister will later criticize Moshe about Zipporah. Yes, they're punished by Hashem for speaking Lashon Hara, but maybe what they were saying is, Moshe, isn't it enough you neglected your kids, but why are you neglecting your wife? And you leave her, you don't have relations with her anymore. And so maybe that's something to think about, that, Moshe maybe was the exception that Hashem says he has to lead an exceptional life because he's the number one prophet. He has to be available always. But in general, if you lose your family, what have you gained, even if you convert other people? So maybe that was Moshe's mistake. Another idea perhaps involved here is that you can be great, but it doesn't mean your children will necessarily be great. We know that there are lots of great people that don't pass down their greatness to their offspring. And you can think of, even contemporary, you can think about where the children of Rav Soloveitchik or the Chafetz Chaim or Rav Eliashiv, are they necessarily great leaders like their fathers were? Not necessarily. And maybe that's, in a sense, what Hashem wants, because he's sending a message that the Torah is open to everyone. It's not an aristocracy like in the monarchy. It's a meritocracy. And you rise to great stature when you earn it, not just because you're born into it. And there's a Gemara that says this very pointedly. It says, be careful not to neglect the children of the poor, because from them the Torah primarily will go forth. And then the Gemara asks, why is it not usual for scholars to give birth to sons who are also scholars? Rabbi Yosef says, so that it should not be said that the Torah is their automatic inheritance. Rav Shisha said, so that they should not become arrogant towards the community and think, no matter what I do, hey, I'm from a royal family, so, I'm beyond any kind of criticism. Mar Zutra said, because such people act high-handedly against the community, and Rav Ashi adds, because they call people asses. I'm quoting the Gemara. There it means donkeys, but you can use it any way you want to. In other words, they think because their father or grandfather, whoever it may be, was famous, so they're famous too, but not necessarily. Rabbi Sachs talks about this as well, and he notes that, look at what happens in history. Shlomo HaMelech gives birth to who? Rechavam. Rechavam will divide the kingdom, and it will end up in a split between Yehuda and Yisrael. Chizkiyahu is one of the greatest kings, but who is his son? Menashe, and he's one of the worst of all the kings. Not all parents, he says, succeed with all their children all the time, because people possess freedom. We choose who to become. We choose who to become. Neither our genes nor our upbringing guarantee that we will be the person that our parents wanted us to be. Nor is it right that parents, he says, should overimpose their will on children. When they reach the age of maturity, they have to go their own way. And so this story is such a deep story on so many levels, but in many ways it is tragic, because we never hear again, from the children, we hear this story in a very negative context, but we never hear anything good about Gershom, about Eliezer. And that doesn't mean to say they were bad people, but they obviously did not inherit Moshe's greatness. And again, there is a positive spin to that it shows you have to earn it. You can't just simply automatically claim it. But also it's very, in a sense, very sad to think about it, that we don't always succeed in promoting and maintaining the same values and the same commitment in our children and grandchildren that we have. And that's life. And the Torah presents life. I want to end on a more hopeful note. And that is that in Divrei HaYamim, in the book of Chronicles, it refers to Gershon's son at some point, not as Yonatan, but as Shavuel. Shavuel, the rabbis translate as meaning return to God, Shavuel. And they postulate that Yonatan eventually repented. He quit the idolatrous cult and he became a faithful Jew. And although there was obviously a lot of dishonor such that we had to add a letter to Tanakh, it's not simple. We added a letter and we floated a letter. We did a lot of strange things out of deference to Moshe. But at the end of the day, we have this hope that even if we do have a situation where one of our children goes, quote unquote, off the derech and drifts away, nevertheless, he or she may come back in the course of time, as Yonatan did, and his new name, Shavuel, indicated that he had at least returned to a belief in Hashem Echad. So the story of Yitro and Moshe is very, very complex. Yitro, as I said, is kind of a stranger. He comes along for a very brief time, and we don't hear from him again. We don't hear from any of his ancestors, really. There's some discussion in the story of Yael and Sisro referring to the Kenim, maybe connected to Yitro. We don't hear anything from him again. And it seems to me very probable he goes back to Midian. He says somewhere else, I'm going to my family. But the story contains with it some tremendous lessons for life. And as I said, a lot to think about in maintaining this chain of transmission that has started a long time ago and will continue all the way until ultimately Moshiach. So again, we will be back at some point, technically on March 9th. And I do want at some point to talk about this issue of the earthquake and the place of God in nature, etc. We'll get there next time. So if anybody has a comment, I will ask Tal and Emery, you can unmute the group. And if anybody wants to say something, I think you can do that more than I can.
Rabbi Weiss?
Yes, David.
There's a slight problem with the timeline. Yonatan, in relation to Shoftim, would have to have been at least 150, 160 years old, which does provide a slight problem in proving it's the same Gershom.
It could. Remember that it might have skipped. It might have possibly skipped between Gershon and Yonatan. Maybe Yonatan, if you want to say, maybe he, instead of a grandson, maybe he was a great grandson, and you can add some years in there that way. Back when people are living to 120, I agree that it could present a problem, but again, sometimes when we say son and son we would say, but grandson, maybe it's talking about great grandson or even great great grandson. but I hear you. Any other comments? You can unmute yourself, I think, if you want to say anything, right? Thank you, Tal. All right, well, I think I've given you a lot to think about. So thank you all for tuning in. And remember that we do have past Parsha Shiurim that you can always access on YouTube. And everybody have a Shabbat Shalom, stay healthy, and I will keep you posted as to our next year. Thanks.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you as always.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wherever you are, stay warm.
Shabbat Shalom.